Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. North Korea's self-imposed satellite launch window has already expired, but eyes are on whether a second launch is attempted anytime soon. And so, South Korea is showing that along with Japan and the U.S., the utmost efforts are being made to make sure the UNSC speaks up against North Korea's persistent provocations. Meanwhile, Pyongyang was widely expected to hold yet another plenary meeting before mid-June, but all has been quiet on that front. If it does happen, what would be the main topics up for discussion? For an in-depth analysis, we invited Dr. Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow at Asan Institute for Policy Studies, into the studio. Dr. Go, welcome to the show.
Good to be back.
And we also have Shreyas Reddy, Correspondent at NK News Seoul. Good to see you, Shreyas.
Thank you for having me.
All right, first question to our Dr. Go. The window that North Korea had set to launch a satellite-carrying space rocket has already passed. And since Pyongyang said that it would not let the IMO know about the next possible launch, we may have to depend on Seoul and Washington's capabilities to detect the next one if it comes soon. Will it be detected?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about a huge space vehicle. I mean, it's essentially an intercontinental ballistic missile that's being launched from a well-located launch site. It's going to be very easy to track. And the dilemma for the North Koreans is that it's going to be very difficult for North Koreans to, for instance, avoid the scenario that already they are subject to already, which is, in case of failure, prevent South Korea and the United States from picking up the debris and analyze them. The reason is because unlike other ballistic missile launches, which are more flexible in terms of the angle and direction, we are talking about launching and taking the satellite into the orbit. So that means all the direction in which the space vehicles are launched are always going to be towards the equator. So it means from the North Koreans' vantage point, it has to be from the north to the south. So the trajectory of launch is not going to be very similar to the one that they tried last time. So if they launch it again, then because the South Koreans and the United States already expect North Koreans to follow the same trajectory that they used last time, it's going to be very easy for the alliance to track the space vehicle.
Right, it won't be that difficult to detect.
Exactly.
Right. Now, Shreyas, the launch window has closed, like we said before, but as Pyongyang vowed to launch another satellite as soon as possible, it could happen at any time. And so experts have widely chosen 2 dates, July 27th and September 9th. What significance do these dates have, and do you think these dates are plausible enough?
Well, North Korea does often stage major events on anniversaries. For example, July 27th is coming up. It is the 70th anniversary of the end of the Korean War. But in all honesty, those dates are not going to be the biggest factor in deciding when North Korea launches these satellites. That will largely come down to a combination of other factors. For example, how quickly they can fix the issues that caused the first failure in the first place, as well as other environmental factors. For example, weather could always play a part. If anything, I would say in this particular case, it might actually be less likely that North Korea will choose to stage satellite launch on those days. But for example, in the case of July 27th, there are already signs based on satellite imagery that North Korea may be preparing to hold a parade that day. So if it comes down to a military parade in Pyongyang and satellite launch on the West Coast, the leadership would not want to be split between the two events. The focus is likely to be on the parade that day, and the satellite launch, when it happens, will get its own attention.
Right, I see. Now, staying on the satellite front, NK News analyzed maritime data and reported that Chinese vessels have intensified their patrols in the Red Sea, perhaps in an attempt to recover the space rocket debris before South Korea. Could you tell us more about this?
Right. So maritime records show that Chinese vessels identified as law enforcement vessels have been seen in that area making patrols deviating from their usual routes. And essentially, the most plausible reason for this is that they are also attempting to fish out the remains of the satellite. When it comes down to it, the remains of the satellite and the space launch vehicle are in international waters, so both sides can go for it, and it's a race to see whichever one gets there first.
Right. Now, Dr. Go, according to the source, China is possibly searching for the debris on behalf of North Korea, though we do not know for sure. Now, what could China's intentions be? And like our Shreyas told us, the first to find the wreckage could claim the right for the debris. If China claims the debris before South Korea does, what would that mean for Seoul and Washington?
So what China is possibly trying to do is prevent South Korea and the United States from getting access to this information, intelligence bonanza that's represented by this debris. So the experts on North Korea's missile development have been following for a long time the development roadmap of North Korea's missiles. And one of the big blanks that they have faced is that the provenance of some of the key components that are part of North Korea's rapidly developing ballistic missile program. For instance, what kind of materials they are using for the most stressful part of the missiles, such as the re-entry vehicles, what kind of engines, rocket engines they are using, and how they develop. So these are all big question marks, and there are fundamental questions in order to find out how North Korea has been able to evade the very strict surveillance by the international community to prevent the country from having access to this kind of key and sensitive technologies. So going back to 2012, when the Una rocket suffered a similar failure and fell into the Yellow Sea, and then when South Korea recovered the debris, yielded a major information bonanza, and then allowed us to understand not just the technology level that North Korea had reached, but also it could easily forecast what kind of a development roadmap the North Koreans had in mind to perfect missile technology. I think we are going to have a similar success story if we have access, we get hands on the debris. And I think South Korea has essentially probably have been able to get their hands on some of the debris already. So I think what the Chinese and the South Koreans are still searching for are probably the top prize, which is the re-entry part, not re-entry, but the top part of the rocket, which contains the military satellite. So this is another way to, I mean, North Korea have claimed that they are launching a military reconnaissance satellite, and that's the reason why they even changed the nomenclature of the satellites, the naming scheme, from calling it a Gwangmyeong-sung
Yes.
to Malligyong. So this is, I mean, the South Korea and the United States haven't had access to that technology from North Korea for ever. So if we can have our hands on that piece of satellite, then it's going to allow us to understand better, what kind of technology North Korea have access to. And this is a scenario that China is most fearful of, because by all expectations, our understanding is that North Korea has been able to achieve a very rapid development in the missile program thanks to the Chinese assistance, whether it's official or not. Doesn't really matter, but then we believe that some of the key components and technology come from either China or Russia. So I think there's an interest on the part of the Chinese to prevent South Korea and the United States from knowing this or confirming this suspicion. So I think that's the reason why the Chinese are very active searching for this debris as well.
Right, I see. Dr. Go, one more question here. Recently, South Korea's top nuclear negotiator, Kim Gun, and U.S. representative for North Korea, Sung Kim, held a meeting and agreed to make Pyongyang realize that there is nothing it can get through further provocations. What would be the proper approach for Seoul and Washington to take?
So I mean, definitely the proper approach would be to continue with the policy. I think even though there's a lot of criticism about this policy directed at North Korea that emphasizes sanctions and deterrence for creating tension in the peninsula, but I think it's working in many ways. We have to compare, we just have to look at the number of provocations that North Koreans carried out last year compared to this year. Even though the rhetoric coming from Washington and Seoul have become much more strict and pointed sometimes, the fact of the matter is that North Koreans are refraining from carrying out the number of provocations that they did last time, last year. So it shows that the deterrence is having an impact on the North Korean behavior. So I think it's likely that the North Koreans are facing a lot of pressure, both internally and externally. And that means that North Koreans will have to come back to the negotiation table. I'm actually cautiously optimistic that the North Koreans will engage the rest of the international community because their hardline policy, the North Korea's hardline policy of insisting only on the nuclear and missile development is not paying off, diplomatically at least.
Right, I see. Now, shifting gears a little bit here, Shreyas, North Korea was expected to convene another plenary meeting of the ruling Workers' Party before mid-June. Since today is already the 14th, many say it may not happen. If it is not held, could we say the failure of the launch was one of the reasons behind this? And if it is held, would it be unusual given that party usually convenes the meeting once or twice a year, but this would already be the second one?
Well, I think in terms of whether or not the meeting will be held, certainly it is a little unusual that they set out a deadline, and the general expectation was it would probably happen in the first 10 days of the month. The fact that we've already passed that does suggest that other factors led to a delay. Possibly the satellite launch may be a factor. There could also be other reasons. Whether or not it happens remains to be seen. I think a lot depends on what they intended to announce or cover during the session. They had some general plans like economic development, party and government matters. But at plans like these, there was always the chance that something else could happen, maybe something related to the satellite, maybe something related to North Korea's COVID situation, border closures. Who knows? Maybe there could be other factors involved. So as for whether it could still happen, certainly, we'll find out. We should hopefully find out soon. And as for whether it's unusual that they're having or a second one in the first half of this year already, at the end of the day, it comes down to North Korea, how many meetings they hold a year. They can do as many as they feel like. So last year, they held 2 in the entire year. But in 2021, they held 4. Admittedly, 2 were around the time of the party congress, which was a major event. But these numbers can vary.
Oh, I see. We'll just have to wait and see if it is held. Now, Dr. Go, though it is still an assumption, if it is held, experts widely expect Kim Jong-un to review the economic status quo of the first half of this year. And given that not much has changed since the first meeting, some hint the meeting could be just for political reasons. What's your view on this?
So I think the speculation is right, that the North Koreans are postponing this meeting because of the failure of the the satellite launch. I'm sure they wanted to have a successful satellite launch to be the backdrop of the meeting, because I don't think the expected meeting, the plenary meeting, is going to contain only the good rosy news about the success of their missile program. They also have to address the growing economic pressure that the North Korean society is facing.
Right.
So that's all the more reason why the North Korean regime might have been focused on the success of the satellite launch. So, but sooner or later they're going to have this plenary meeting, and then I think the essential agenda there will be the economy again. We know that the North Koreans are making tentative moves to reopen the country to the outside trade, and then I think the regime has to prepare the country for that. They have to manage the expectations. It's not going to be a full-fledged opening of the country. There will be no resumption of trade the way we used to see before COVID-19. And I think it's going to be limited trade, focused mostly on the essential commodities and materials. So I think that they need to manage the expectation, and also they have to prepare the country against the possible expectation that the market will make a return. I think North Korea is going to stick to the current policy of emphasizing the development of the missiles and the nuclear weapons rather than normalizing the economic situation. So I think that's going to be the central message of the expected plenary meeting.
I see. Now, Shreyas, since we keep talking about this economy, North Korea is currently going through an economic crisis, as we can see it until now. And some point out that opening borders and resuming trade with China and Russia could be the fastest way to overcome this crisis. And according to the NK News, trade between China and North Korea has recently picked up. Could you tell us more about this?
Yes, certainly. Well, in the last few months, we have seen a steady rise in trade, while, as Dr. Go pointed out, it certainly will take a while before anything can normalize to pre-pandemic levels, given the impact of border closures, natural disasters, as well as, of course, many years of economic sanctions. There still has been a significant rise in the last few months, and in April in particular, we saw a continued rise, not just in imports from China, which had been continuing for a while, but even a rather exceptional increase in exports. In fact, it was the highest exports from North Korea to China in 5 years, even going back to before the pandemic levels. This was mostly because of the export of wigs and fake beards to China, which is something North Korea often sends there. So it was perhaps a one-off. We'll see soon. But at the end of the day, it does at least indicate that there is a gradual reopening, or at least easing of trade restrictions between North Korea and its neighbors. And we've also seen in the past month, Russia has stepped up exports of wheat flour to North Korea. So this is a part of a bigger trend, because even with Chinese exports to North Korea, the biggest factor in the recent months has been rice, quite consistent most of the time. So it is quite almost certainly as an indicator of the economic problems in the country, the lingering food shortages over the last few years, which even Kim Jong-un has admitted to. So as of now, North Korea is still going to be heavily reliant on its allies, on its neighbors, to provide the food that its citizens have been lacking.
Right. Now, moving on to Russia, since we were talking about the allies of North Korea. North Korea is trying to strengthen ties with Russia as well, voicing willingness to build stronger ties with a congratulatory message to Russian President Vladimir Putin for Moscow's Russia Day. How does Pyongyang consider its relations with Russia right now?
While it isn't altogether unusual for North Korea's leader to send a message on the national day of an allied country to its leader, it is still obviously a good indicator of just how close these countries have become, particularly as both states have become international pariahs of a sort in the last few years. We see this consistently on the international stage. While Russia continues to back North Korea at the UN and keeps echoing Pyongyang's stance, blaming the US-led military drills for tensions in the region. At the same time, North Korean state media echo the Kremlin's talking points and consistently blame the US and NATO for the Ukraine war. We saw that even as recently as last week, when state media issued a statement implying that Ukraine was responsible for the bombing the dam breach rather than Russia. And so we're likely to continue seeing the two sides, and also China, as part of this wider alliance where they're continuing to back each other and echo each other's talking points. And on the bigger stage, be it in Asia or in Europe, banding together in opposition to the US and its allies.
Right. Oh, no, Dr. Go, I believe this will be our last question, but aside between Russia, China, and North Korea getting stronger, the confrontation line against Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo is getting clearer. How can South Korea balance its role as a U.S. ally and also maintain its relationship with neighboring countries like China?
So I think what needs to be done first and foremost is for South Korea to make it very clear, not just to China, but also to the international community, which side South Korea belongs to. I think the idea of being ambiguous, having an ambiguous position about the great power competition between China and the United States will ultimately make South Korea much more in a risky place than people think. And I think what the United States is doing is exactly that it's reaffirming the fact that we have an alliance with the United States, that we are a liberal democratic country, that we uphold norms and values in the international order. And this is something that the Chinese don't want to hear from South Korea. And essentially, they're creating frictions, like the recent statement by the Chinese ambassador to South Korea, Xing Yamin, that it was purposeful. The intention there was to pressure South Korea to remain ambiguous between Washington and Beijing, which ultimately favors the Chinese strategic interests at the same time, which is detrimental to South Korea's own national interest. So I think we are going to go through this kind of adjustment process. The adjustment meaning in terms of expectations that Beijing has about South Korea. But once we pass this stage, I think once the Beijing's expectation of Seoul is settled and stable, then I think what's going to allow us to have with China is a much more constructive and sustainable relationship. So until that happens, which I don't think is going to last a long time, we are going to hear this kind of frictions time to time, but that's something that we should get used to.
Right, so we need to go through this adjustment process.
Exactly.
Right, I see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Go.
Thank you.
And thank you, Shreyas, for
you very
your
much.
insights. We really appreciate it. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.